We have to discuss another very controversial topic this morning, a heated battle being waged in North Carolina over a new anti-discrimination law that excludes protections for the LGBT community. The fallout has been swift. Governors of New York, Washington, and Vermont have banned official travel to North Carolina, and more than 80 businesses are calling on Governor Pat McCrory to repeal the law. McCrory, for his part, blaming the media for the backlash.
I'm clearly confident when the facts get out and that when you clearly communicate the facts as opposed to some of this national propaganda, which is a well-coordinated political campaign that is distorting the facts of the true ordinance, then I think everything will be fine.
All right, so let's get both sides now. North Carolina State Representative Dan Bishop is the lead sponsor of the bill, and Catherine Oakley is a senior legislative counsel for the Human Rights Campaign. Good morning to both of you. Representative Bishop, Governor McCrory says that the facts within HB 2 being distorted by the media. How so?
Well, it's a very common sense measure. Good morning to you. Charlotte, the city of Charlotte that I represent, passed an ordinance that, among other things, eliminated rights of privacy in bathroom and shower facilities, allowing people of the opposite sex to come in, and people were enormously upset about that. It created enormous turmoil. We passed a law that restores common sense, establishes in public buildings a traditional bathroom use policy, and clarifies the limits of local authority.
Kate, how does this law affect LGBT citizens directly? Explain it to our viewers.
Yeah, well, I completely disagree with the idea that this is a common sense law. HB 2 is an extreme piece of legislation that was pushed by extreme legislators. HB 2 is unprecedented throughout the country. It is a more extreme bill than the bill that was vetoed by the Republican governor of South Dakota just a few months ago. And this bill, not only does it overturn the provisions of the Charlotte non-discrimination ordinance that apply to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, it also institutes policies around bathroom use for both students and adults in public facilities. And that's incredibly important because it's that part of the bill, the part that talks about students and bathroom use, that's similar to what was in South Dakota. This bill goes beyond that by extending that also to transgender adults who are in facilities that are owned by the state or state agencies, including public universities and cities. And so those bathrooms are now going to be offered only in a discriminatory way to transgender people. And it's hugely problematic.
So here's the question then, Representative Bishop. Your state is now requiring students to use restrooms, locker rooms based on birth gender. But this legislation is at odds with the federal Title IX law. So how do you plan to reconcile that?
Well, it's not at odds with Title IX. And to correct you slightly, it's not birth gender, it's gender via the birth certificate. And that can be changed for someone who is a surgical transsexual. With respect to, I lost the other part of your question, I'm sorry.
I said, how do you plan to reconcile that? You said it wasn't at odds with Title IX.
Oh, Title IX, yeah. So the Obama administration has a new interpretation of Title IX that they've offered, saying that discrimination against sex includes not allowing students to go into the opposite gender bathroom if they're transgender students, but it's contrary to their own regulations, and the only courts that have considered that argument have both rejected it.
So how do you plan to deal with businesses who are opposing this? Because Bank of America, which is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, announced late on Tuesday on Twitter that its leadership was joining over 80 chief executives, including Timothy Cook, who's the CEO of Apple, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, objecting to this new law. And then earlier in the day yesterday, the chief executives published a letter addressed to the governor on the Human Rights Campaign website saying such laws are bad for our employees and bad for business. So then how are you going to deal with the possible loss of millions and millions of dollars in revenue because people don't necessarily agree with these actions?
Well, you know, there's a couple of polls out about what North Carolinians believe. And in both of those, as consistent with what happened in Houston about a year ago, 65 to 70% of people say they think the provision in Charlotte that eliminated the rights of women and children to privacy in bathrooms is unsafe and unreasonable. And so that's what we have repaired. If those businesses, North Carolina is on the top 4 or 5 positions in every list of desirable places to do business in the nation. And if those businesses decide that if they're telling us to repeal our bill that restored those rights, those protections, then they're asking us to go back and revive Charlotte's ordinance that puts people in that untenable position, that gives no credence whatsoever to the privacy rights of women and children in vulnerable positions. Yeah. So I'm skeptical that's what they really mean, but if they do, then they're hurting themselves, because North Carolinians, the people of North Carolina, are who we answer to.
I wish we had more time to discuss this. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The bill sponsor, Dan Bishop, and also Catherine Oakley, Senior Legislative Counsel for the Human Rights Campaign. Appreciate that. Let's check in now with CNN's Michaela.